when you look at the arc of history yourself and the conversations you're having and the research you're doing as a futurist, what gives you the most confidence, if you like, that we'll successfully navigate this rapid AI transformation as we have previous digital and industrial transformations?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like you said, it just speaks to the zeitgeist of our times, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
are we going to make it through this? And I mean, the fact of what you just said is the evidence to me that we will make it. The fact that there is an arc of human history.
So, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the new P&L Principles and Leadership in Business podcast. I'm Paul, I'm host of the podcast, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Just a quick reminder before we introduce the first guest. All podcasts like ours, we thrive and we survive on you, our audience, on you engaging with us, liking us, subscribing to us, making a comment or making a review. So I'd really encourage you to do it if you enjoy this episode, if you enjoy any of the episodes of the new P&L. Please do take a moment to reach out and engage with us. We've built a really amazing community over the last 5 years, and I'd like to keep that growing with this new series. And on that note, we're also looking for sponsors, corporate sponsors for the new P&L podcast and the various mini series and core series that we offer. So if you're a brand that wants to align yourself with a top 5% podcast that is building and designing strategies and frameworks about how we use purpose to redefine leadership and culture in the age of AI, then just get in touch. And all of those details will be in the notes that accompany the podcast. This week, we're speaking with Alexandra Whittington. Alexandra is a recognized global futurist and foresight expert, and she's ranked as one of the top female futurists in the world. She spent decades working with her clients to anticipate disruption and design resilient strategies for their organization. She holds a master's degree in strategic foresight from the University of Houston, where she also taught for over a decade before she joined the Future of Business team at Tata Consultancy Services. So Alex, a very warm welcome to the new P&L. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Paul.
It's my pleasure. So let's start with a quick introduction to who you are, what you do, and who you do it for.
Well, I'm Alexandra Whittington, and please feel free to call me Alex. You'll see that name out there a lot too associated with me. And I am a Houston based futurist. I'm a native Texan. I was born and raised here. And I'm a member, you might say, of that University of Houston futurist community that you may have heard of. We're pretty well known and we've got members all over the world. So I am, after studying to become futurist at the University of Houston, I have stayed in Houston and I am now in the corporate world where I work at a big tech company in a futurist role. I'm on a team called Future of Business, and we do a lot of, the typical futurist activities, engagement, speaking, writing, thought leadership, and of course, the research and scanning and all that day-to-day stuff that futurists just love to do.
Wonderful. And we'll probably touch on most of those across the course of our conversation today. And I think it must be a really fascinating time to be a futurist at the moment, in part, I guess, because with AI especially, the future seems to be arriving at the same time as we predicted, and sometimes before we predicted. So when you look at the arc of history yourself and the conversations you're having and the research you're doing as a futurist, what gives you the most confidence, if you like, that we'll successfully navigate this rapid AI transformation as we have previous digital and industrial transformations?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like you said, it just speaks to the zeitgeist of our times, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
are we going to make it through this? And I mean, the fact of what you just said is the evidence to me that we will make it. The fact that there is an arc of human history, and it is a very long one, and humans have endured many different conditions over time. And as many people have noticed over the years, we're very adaptable, right? We're
Yes.
an adaptable species. So we can, kind of adjust. It's not easy and it's not fun necessarily, but it is part of who we are. It's part of what I like to, try to use that to remember is that we're part of the natural world. And we probably wouldn't ever think that, oh, is AI going to wipe out, raccoons or something? Are they going to make it? Are they going Yeah, they're going to be here. They've been here and they're going to be here. But it's not going to be the same as it's always been, but that's the nature of our story, right? The story of life is this constant change, adaptation, evolution.
One of the challenges I think with AI, particularly in terms of the speed of its complexity, the size, scale of the change, is when I speak to a lot of business leaders, they've said to me in previous digital evolutions, revolutions, however you define it, we can think about the dot-com boom when the web came on stream, desktop publishing, and so on. However far back you go, there was always a period of time for leaders to recognize, adjust, and adapt to what was coming. And so they were the captains, if you like, to use the analogy, to navigate their organizations through this change. One of the expressions I continually get back is that there isn't time to understand and to adapt often with AI. So leaders are in the same place as us, is it? And that we're all trying to figure out what this adaptation looks like, what this navigation looks like. Do you think that sets AI aside from previous industrial technological revolutions, that we're all trying to figure it out? Or are you confident that right at the top of organizations, leadership still have the same principles of navigation that they did?
Yeah, I think the post-industrial era is also post-hierarchies. And that's what's kind of interesting about it. It's not just a new technology, it suggests a new form of social organization. So we
Mhm.
think about all of those artifacts in our society that harken back to the industrial time period, which is things like the 9 to 5 day, the Monday through Friday work week, the classroom and school year that revolves around that agricultural cycle, for example, right? That they took the farmers off the farms and put their kids into schools to teach them how to work in the factories,
Mhm.
right? As all of that is sort of dissipating, um, we're getting a new, organizing system. So I think that it's really important to note that, unlike some of the other general purpose technologies or technological revolutions, this is sort of having a democratizing effect
Mhm.
on those, phenomenon that I don't know if you call it, a revolution or evolution, but as we get used to a new technology, society changes, our behavior changes, we create the technology, it creates us back and all this, exchange. But this time, like I agree with you, it seems like it's happening more in the hands of every person.
Yes.
Instead of being very concentrated with the wealthy or the property owners or whichever, the king and queen or whatever, leadership system we have, but, the religions of the time. It feels like it's more in the hands of the people.
Yeah. So leaders who thrived in the industrial age, they were optimizers, optimizing that industrial technology as it stood to thrive, to grow their organizations, the economy. Leaders who thrived in the digital age were connectors, bringing that network offline and online together. What kind of leader does the age of AI need? What will define the leadership, the characteristics of leadership in the age of AI?
Well, luckily, I feel like this is becoming very highly spoken about on the social channels, on LinkedIn, on, these different networks. Um, Human skills,
Hmm.
right? Relational skills, being able to speak to a person, the whole idea of empathy. So I do agree that those, non-technical and, just relating to people, things about, caring for others. Um, all of those skills, teaching, um, working with people of all ages and also protecting others. I think those are going to be the skills of the future and the direction that we need to take it. Ultimately humanizing society more in face of sort of a more technological force that's growing.
If we are to do that within our organizations with intention, at scale, build them into the organizational principles of it rather than just nice to haves, do we need also a mindset shift? So we've talked in the past about soft skills and hard skills being that technical ability, that professional ability, soft skills being exactly what you've talked about, the empathy, the kindness, the understanding, and so on. But do we need to reframe those as core skills in order to ensure they systematize across organizations for the age of AI?
Yeah, I think so. I think we do. We need to teach them in school, expose people to them. We need to have expectations about those things. Right now, you can finish school and no one cares or bothers to check if you're a decent human being. you know,
Yeah.
there's no barrier for that. So,
Yes.
I mean, especially considering there have been studies showing that like people that get into CEO positions have these negative, dark personality traits sometimes. I mean, there's some aspects of today's leadership that really need to be evaluated, and we need to put a more human um, spirit, into a lot of these leadership roles, and that may have to do with letting the gender equality balance be more equal, right? To balance out the gender equality, I guess. Or it may be that, we just aren't approaching organization. Maybe we need to learn more social sciences, right?
Yes.
Systems. How do these parts connect, and what are the patterns, and what are the flows, and where do things get stuck? So I think, maybe that kind of thinking, teaching, exposure would be helpful to humanizing our organizations.
Playing a slightly contrarian role, why do we have to do that? What is unique about the AI evolution, revolution that requires us to be more in touch with our empathy, with those core human skills than ever before? Because I guess we could argue that they should have always been a core part of our organization. We've always talked about soft skills, as I say. Why is it now that is so important for us to rehumanize our organizations?
I would think it has to do with the fact that AI will be doing the work. If we can, so what else are we gonna do, right? We're not gonna be crunching numbers, we're not gonna be making these we're gonna be pulling an all-nighter anymore, hopefully, for the next meeting. We're gonna be a lot more, in control of the workflow. It won't be so
Mhm.
overwhelming. That's the idea, right? We put it to work for us. So, therefore, that's the next best thing to pour our energies into. It's something that's been lacking um, over this past several decades where families feel, stressed by the dual working household, right? With
Yes.
kids trying to get them to school, where, people don't make enough money to support themselves. And uh, social systems become under strain as a result. There's all sorts of things happening that we could alleviate if we put humans more at the center of our organizations. And we should do that if it is in fact the case that we get to offload a bunch of time-sucking work,
Mhm.
AI.
What do CEOs or leaders, organizational leaders, need to unlearn? So we've talked a little bit there about the core skills that we need to focus more on. What do we need to unlearn to ensure A, that we can adopt those with more conviction, but B, that we can also lead in this age of AI?
Well, I've got a couple thoughts on this. One, I'm gonna keep it really focused on the future of work, which is unlearn that a person's entire career trajectory can be defined by the age of 18 or 20, that they've learned everything they need to know to do this job, and that's it. You just start doing your job. You don't really need to learn that much more. I think we need to change the idea of a job as something so central to our identity. We need to connect it more to purpose and, have this kind of flexibility, right? More flexibility when it comes to bridging us from education to career to retirement. I think we need the continuity across that and stop seeing it as, economic benefits of each stage, right? Like I'm in my working years, I've got to make all this money and just kill it at work while I can because soon I'm gonna be old and be retired. I just need to just do everything. This mentality, like I'll enjoy life when I retire. I think we need to just let all that go
Right.
and start enjoying life while, all the time as much as we can and make work part of that enjoyment and make learning, education, work, skills, talent, all of those things something that we can kind of just dip in and out of. Like, hey, I need to learn something now. I want to learn something new. Or I'm not ready to learn right now. I don't want to learn. I just want to focus on what I'm doing. We should have more adaptability. So I think if CEOs can somehow, bridge all those gaps that I just mentioned from birth to retirement, that's, where we need to be thinking.
Someone said to me the other day, which made me really laugh because it's probably half true. She said AI, generative AI, let's say for argument's sake, for ease of conversation, generative AI serves two very specific groups of people. It serves people that want to learn everything and people that don't want to do anything. And I thought that was such a great analogy of perhaps, lots of us at work who, from time to time, depending on the role, some of us have wanted to learn everything in our role, and others of us at other times have decided that we don't really want to do anything. And if we're honest, we can probably all put up our hands and recognize when that is. That's disconcerting to a culture, I think, because it only tends to reinforce what already exists within a culture. AI will only amplify the cultures that are great, and a leader who has a vision, who will bring AI in to support that culture, to drive that organization forward and to create a vision. But it will also amplify toxicity in culture. Those who have a passive culture at best and toxic at worst, and those who don't really want to do anything or whatever it happens to be. How do we ensure within an organization as a leader that we use this moment as a milestone to elevate culture rather than allow it to pacify or create greater toxicity?
I'm glad you asked because I realize this show is probably airing later, but we just observed International Women's Day, and what I put out on my blog yesterday, or within the past few days in observation, is 10 key questions for women in the age of AI, and I've sort of unearthed and put together some different resources I've had over the years that I've shared with audiences, and it's for me this list of 10 questions I came up with, they cover things like ethics, the family, caring, health, my career. I think if we can start getting deeper into the specific user needs, right? We need to not just think of generative AI or any AI as some blanket thing. It's one thing for kids, right? We want to think about it one way when we think about letting it into the classroom and one on one tutors and all that, babysitters with our children. Same with older people, right? We're not just going to stick a unwell, dementia patient with an AI that hasn't been properly vetted to make sure it
Yes.
won't harm the person. And so, same with women, right? I think we need to put guardrails around. So, I'm talking about protecting populations that we know are already frequently, I don't know, let's say marginalized by the systems that exist, the young, the old, women, various ethnicities. I mean, there's a number of groups, students, even in many cases. Um, so, how do we use it so that we don't harm those already vulnerable populations? I think that's one of the ways to integrate it into our culture without reinforcing or repeating the negative stuff. So, yeah, I hope that was good.
It does, yeah. I guess in that sense, it requires perhaps an acknowledgement that bias is always going to exist, whether it's in an analog world, human to human, or whether it's because humans are inputting into AI, whether it's in an AI and algorithmic world. What can we do to, rather than pretend that we're going to solve the bias that is inherent within all AI or pretend it doesn't exist? What can we do to mitigate the bias that will inevitably exist in any AI system when it comes to the marginalized groups you've just provided the example of?
I think that's another place that the unlearning comes in because unlearning is just basically dropping assumptions that don't work, that are failing us, that are weak, that are, biased essentially.
Mhm.
So unlearning a lot of what we think is already true. And that doesn't mean like, erase your memory. It means let go of those things for a time and be able to step out of your own worldview to see how others experience. It's sort of a mix of critical thinking and empathy, right? So I think that there is a place for that. It's just not been so well articulated around other technologies.
Yes.
Maybe there wasn't a need to. I mean, electricity can kill you, but I mean, it's more of a safety feature, right? Electricity can harm you in a number of ways, but AI can, crush your spirit, right? AI can drive a person, unfortunately, can drive people to mental illness. AI can give you bad information about your health conditions and trick you into thinking you don't need a vaccine or a medication or something. So I think, it's a different experience in that regard. And that's where the unlearning is going to help us, where we think critically and let go of like basic assumptions. Even if they've served us well, we should be able to examine them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I read just recently your paper, Five Disruptions Reweaving the Social Fabric by 2035. And it was really great piece of writing and thought leadership. And I'll include the link in the notes that accompany the podcast. But the last point, the last disruption really fascinated me. I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. As most listeners will know, I have some Māori heritage in my DNA. And you cite as the fifth disruption ancestral knowledge as one of the forthcoming disruptions, asking, can the wisdom of the past shape the future? And I thought right now, a futurist raising that point was quite fascinating. So, why do you think right now is the time for the wisdom of the past to influence our thinking in such a fundamental way?
And I'm so glad you asked me about that because that really is one of my favorite futurist ideas that's taking place all around the world right now.
Hmm.
Um, you may have heard of the film Black Panther.
Yes.
And that had a lot of touches of what's called Afrofuturism, right? Sort of an alternative future or a scenario where this African culture has sort of, achieved technological advancements. And you saw the film, right? It's a really
Yeah.
beautiful vision. There's also something here in the States and obviously throughout the Americas known as Chicano futurism or Latino futurism, which is basically doing the same thing, but with Aztec, Mayan, and other indigenous cultures from our part of the world.
Hmm.
Similarly, I feel confident I've come across also indigenous societies from your part of the world originally taking part in this. So it's really cool to see how there's this sort of blend of sci fi, history, indigenous culture, anthropology, which happened to be my undergraduate major. So that might
Hmm.
explain why I like it so much. But these new ways of looking at the future by drawing from the past and recognizing that, first of all, the people from the past had technology. They
Hmm.
had all kinds of technology. It wasn't the internet, but it was something that met their basic needs. And some of it was very far spread and some of it was extremely advanced. And we don't even know the half of it. And I'm just going to throw here right now another angle in, which is as a futurist, I get really excited about the idea of AI helping us understand the past better. There's a
Hmm.
bunch of new studies coming out where they're deciphering hieroglyphics. They're figuring out like using LIDAR to see what's under the ground and then using AI to sort of crunch all the data. All of that stuff is really fascinating. I think that so the convergence, you might say, of AI understanding the past better, and also reaching the point of starting to this movement of the Chicano futurism and Afrofuturism. So rising up from the artistic part of the world, right, the artistic side, and the science. Those things coming together are really fascinating at this moment where we, like we discussed, may be on the brink of this massive systemic shift, right, to a new organizing system. So why not look to the past and see what did they know and how can we use it? And that's exactly what a lot of people are doing today. I've read a lot about different forms of, say, architecture that
Hmm.
are drawing from the past. There's energy producing and energy conserving and, sort of like cooling buildings, for example, without electricity,
Yes.
refrigerating food without electricity, using the earth, using the wind, using moisture and humidity and all sorts of things. Drawing from those sustainable practices, I just find it so hopeful and exciting to think that what if we could be nice and comfortable. I live in Texas, right? I'm not going to go without air conditioning, right? But I would so much rather that it was something that wasn't harming our earth. I mean, we all want a better solution. Yeah,
Yes.
we all want a better solution to meet our basic needs and to live comfortably, which our ancestors did do. I mean, we know they went through hardships, they went through hard times, but they also had strategies to live harmoniously with nature. And the fact that we can't see the evidence of how and when and where they did that is proof of how sustainable it was because it's just, it went back into nature.
It
So
would be a wonderfully virtuous circle if AI could teach us more about the past in order for the past to better advise us on the future. And I want to touch on that a little bit more. And you've mentioned in that answer a few really exciting developments in terms of both AI analyzing the past, but also what we could take from that past to understand our future better. And I wondered from your perspective as a futurist, what does AI make possible that perhaps no one is talking about at the moment? What is something that should genuinely excite us when we look towards the future and you, with your futurist hat on, sees what AI is doing now, what it potentially can do? What is something that no one is talking about that will genuinely excite us?
You know, I am really excited about kind of what I just mentioned, archaeological studies, and, maybe just preserving, conservation,
Hmm.
preserving whether it's human artifacts and human languages, nature, taking pictures of stuff that is quickly disappearing so that we can figure out how do we preserve it. I think all forms of conservation
Yes.
um, would be it's something that I don't hear a lot about, but I do think that the role of big data, for example, in biodiversity.
Yes.
I haven't really looked into it, but something like that, it's really important. We have these big challenges like the bees, right? Bees becoming extinct. That would be awesome if AI could be put to work on problems like that are literally life and death. Um, and so I think, yeah, not just preserving the past, but also preserving nature, conserving, and finding solutions to a lot of the big problems.
So I want to touch on that just a little bit more because I'd love the audience to have some sort of compelling, grounded stories to look towards. Because hope, which we could all do with a little bit more of at the moment, I think, given everything that's going on, hope requires a believable story about the future, a conceivable, a tactile story about the future. So in your research you're doing as a futurist, what is the most compelling, grounded story of a better world that you see out there that maybe AI or other technologies are starting to develop? You know, we see some incredible breakthroughs in healthcare and pharma, for example, which I think are areas where AI is really, really beneficial. But what are the grounded stories of a better world that you can give to our audience today to just give them a little bit of hope that we're heading in the right direction?
Oh, that is really important too. I would point to I'm gonna step away from AI a little bit, although I think there's a lot of crossover here. But there's an area known as synthetic biology. Some people talk about the bioeconomy
Mhm.
as part of this. So I'm going to talk about the bioeconomy because this is the idea that it's sort of a new science. It's what I find so interesting about it. It's about working with living materials, right? So the idea that, well, here's a great example: uh, growing shoes from mycelium or mushrooms,
Mhm.
as opposed to making them in a factory, a textile shop, or whatever. Okay, so this idea that we can go from, you know, extracting and producing to just creating things that we use and they're not, let's say, not harmful to the earth, to our systems, to our planet, and so forth. Reducing consumption impacts with this kind of thing. So the idea that we can grow, they even grew, I think, like leather pants, so like that. So the idea that they grew a mushroom house. So mushrooms are not the only thing, but synthetic biology where you can, create new food sources, right? Create plants. This even goes back to the idea of, the plants that are hybrids and hardy to withstand droughts and climate change and all that kind of stuff. So I would point to synthetic biology as a really hopeful area because it's opening up not just a whole new like world of science and understanding of materials and matter and life, but it's producing like really helpful results in, medicine, things like food, things like textiles, making all sorts of consumer goods more sustainable so that when you toss them out, you're not thinking, oh, that's going to be like landfill till my great great grandchildren are dead. It's something that you can, literally put back in the earth. And I think consumers really like that. But there's also health applications, there's energy stuff happening. So bioeconomy and synthetic biology, those are two that's a like a story about the future that I think gives us hope.
I really like that. I was chuckling to myself, and it's probably a terrible dad joke, but I am a dad, so anyway. Um, in the future, where the parents will be, rather than saying "Go and get your shoes," they'll be going "Go get your shrooms." But but it's probably a bad joke for the first episode of the new series. But anyway, um, I want to explore that a little bit more because I think the whole synthetic biology and bioeconomy is a really interesting area, and we touched about 3 or 4 questions ago on AI enabling us to find a little bit more purpose, that we have to rethink what it looks like to have a career, to do 9 to 5, all of those other things. And another conversation I have with a lot of leaders and a lot of middle management people in the workshops I do and so on is their concern that the generation that's coming through and about to come through universities are doing degrees that are just not going to be relevant by the time they come out because of the speed of change. And even I think, if you think about coders, probably 3 or 4 years ago, if you had a coding degree, you probably thought you were set for life. And even AI has shifted that dramatically. So if someone is studying a Bachelor of Arts degree, a humanities degree, and they look at the future and they hear this podcast today, and you're talking about synthetic biology and the bioeconomy, how do they go from there to there? What is your advice in terms of, and it's a difficult question, I think, but what is your advice on how they reimagine what the possibilities of their career could be? Because we don't know the jobs to do if we don't know what they are. It's that old Donald Rumsfeld, wasn't it? It's the unknown unknowns. If we don't know where the opportunities are, we can't explore how to get there. How do we get from a humanities degree to a career in bioeconomy?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important question. And young people are looking for answers to this because they're starting to see that, they're graduating from college and the opportunities that they thought were going to be there just aren't there. Well, a term a lot of people use to get into this topic is the polymath, sort of like an old timey word for someone who's good at a lot of things, right? That's
Yes.
interested in a lot of things. It sort of goes back to what I was speaking about earlier about having that versatility throughout your life to learn new things, to want to learn new things, to take a break when you're not ready. So I would say, being more of a polymath would be, your best bet right now. um, that means, maybe you're a humanities major, but you should spend some time learning and exposing yourself to biology majors, right? And it
Yes.
doesn't have to be like, you study biology, but maybe you're just, really aware of what's happening in the sciences. Maybe you take an elective or something like that. Maybe you seek a certification because these days there's so much to learn or so many ways to learn online, through videos. You can learn a lot watching YouTube. So I think it's all about being ready to seize on new opportunities and being prepared for that by having a very open mindset. I think the old mindset of, well, I was an English major, so I'm going to be an English teacher.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to do. That those days are over. So we need to think more openly. You may never do what you majored in college, right? What you studied in school may not ever be part of your job description. So you need to make the most of what you're able to study and then be able to have the versatile skill set. And that might mean taking a tech certification. That might
Yes.
mean volunteering in your community and working with older folks so that you have something on your resume that shows that you have social skills and you're good at caring or whatever. There are a number of different ways. So I would just say it's not all about what you learn in the classroom. It's also about what you practice in your life, whether it's social and fun. And let's just get rid of this division between work and fun, right? It's
Yes.
all starting to blend together. So it's really more about finding your purpose. I think if you find your purpose, and that sounds so vague, but finding your purpose and replacing a career trajectory, let's say, or a what we call it what we call a major here in the states, like your concentration of study, the topic area.
Yeah.
Just kind of moving beyond that and being more interested in my passion in life is to feed others, right? Whether I go into a lab and create a new vegetable that can withstand crops or I open a restaurant, there's a whole bunch of ways to do that. So that's my advice, I guess.
No, I think that's very good advice. And I think the Future of Jobs report, the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report, the last 5 or 6 years has consistently cited critical thinking, creative thinking, analytical thinking, curiosity, and lifelong learning, and the top 5 characteristics that employers want from employees. So, in this world where we think everything is going towards technology and everything will be done by technology, actually, the fundamental core skills that employers want more than ever are those basic skills that can't be replicated by technology. The real critical, analytical, bringing your whole life experience into that understanding, into that problem or that opportunity in front of you. So I think you're right. The responsibility is not just with leadership and with organizations and education, but actually with ourselves to look at our own opportunities with a far more critical eye.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing that's going to come in handy is something that I mentioned earlier, which is the social sciences, the
Yes.
system. You don't have to become a anthropologists to learn a little bit about systems, right? To understand that we live in a human system, we're in an earth system. This type of thinking is relatively new, right?
Yes.
Um, the holistic system, right? During the industrial era, we had a more compartmentalized system view, right? Where every piece does its part and that's the only job it does. And when it's done doing its job, we just get rid of that and put a new part in. That sort of industrial model died out or it's dying out. The new world order, I don't know what to call it, the new social system, right? The new
Yeah.
organizing system is much more what? Interconnected. It's more systemic. It's more holistic and, we've gone beyond the idea that we don't need to worry about like environmental impacts of technologies, for example, right? We know now that we've got to think about the climate. We can't just grow, 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 and chase progress at the expense of our earth, right? So things like that, I think, are changing the dynamics there.
I guess that weaves back into your ancestral point, isn't it? Because pre-industrial revolution, that division of labor didn't exist to quite the same degree. There was a more holistic approach to the way we whatever work looked like. And I guess we're bringing the best of both of those things, technology together, which is a wonderful thing when it's used successfully. But we're also bringing that, as you say, that more holistic approach, the understanding that if we're to systematize, then we have to take it consideration and context of everything that exists within that system.
Totally. And I think a couple of existential crises have led us to this point, and that's not great, but we have to learn from these things.
Absolutely.
And the last decade of, global chaos, COVID, economic crashes and whatever's happening now. This is all leading up to I'm going to say, a rebuilding of some form.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, you know, I'm very hopeful that that's the case, and that's my other piece of advice to young people when I do talk to college students these days. Um, be ready to rebuild.
Yes.
Whatever you're pursuing in life, just know that part of it is going to be recreating these social institutions, reforming our bonds to one another, rebuilding a global order, and completely revamping it and making it better. So I think, being ready to start from scratch is going to help everyone.
So this is as I mentioned to you when we had the briefing call, this is the new series of the new P&L, first one for 2026. And as well as all of the general focus on principles and leadership in business and how we utilize purpose to build better businesses, there's a real focus for this one on how we give hope and how we create positivity because there is so much negativity and noise out there. So as our last question, if we were to leave listeners of this episode with one key shift in perspective, one thing that they should see differently or more positively about AI or digital transformation, or the economy more generally, or about their career, as we've touched on that as well, or about themselves, about what's possible in the future for all of those things, what would that be from your perspective? What is the hope and the positivity that you would leave our listeners today with?
I think our greatest hope is always the next generation and the one after that, because every generation is always different. There's never been a carbon copy of a previous generation. They always come up with their own ideas, their own fashions, their own vocabulary, their own social groups. They do things their own way. And they do that in part to rebel, but also because we're a creative species. We can't help but make up new stuff and make it interesting and and bond over it with people in our age group. That's just what we do as people. So I always will have hope in the next coming generations that they're going to be different. I don't know if they're going to be smarter, wiser, better, more attractive, who knows. But they certainly will be different than we have been and bring a different perspective and I'll never lose hope in that.
That's a great commentary to end on, I think, Alex. Thank you so much for your time today on the new P&L. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to our episode today with Alex. I hope you enjoyed it. As I mentioned in the introduction, if you've enjoyed this or any of the other episodes of the new P&L, please do take a moment to rate us or review us or like us or subscribe to it. It all helps with our ratings and our rankings. If you're interested in sponsoring either the core, the new P&L series, or any of our mini series, please do also reach out. And all of the links are in the notes that accompany the podcast. So finally, I'm Paul, host of the new P&L. I look forward to speaking to you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you and have a great day.